My name is Chunlo.
I'm Melissa Nieder.
I'm Shannon G.
I'm Sabrina Bandian.
I'm Steffi Valeni.
I'm Junhan Mao.
Hello, this is our project for accounting information systems, and we are currently working for our client, Parktown Medical Center. So we're going to be basically giving an overview of their current process right now, and we're also going to suggest some internal controls that we can improve on, and hopefully make the system run better.
Parktown Medical Center is a small healthcare provider owned by a publicly held corporation. It employs 7 salaried physicians, 10 nurses, 3 support staff, and 3 clerical workers. The clerical workers perform such tasks as reception, correspondence, cash receipts, billing, and appointment scheduling. All are adequately bonded. Most patients pay for services rendered by cash or check on the day of their visit. Sometimes, however, the physician who is to perform the respective services approves credit based on an interview. When credit is approved, the physician files a memo with one of the clerks to set up the receivable using data the physician generates. The servicing physician prepares a charge slip that is given to one of the clerks for pricing and preparation of the patient's bill. At the end of the day, one of the clerks uses the bills to prepare a revenue summary, and in cases of credit sales, to update the accounts receivable subsidiary ledger. The front office clerks receive cash and checks directly from patients and give each patient a pre-numbered receipt. The clerk takes turns opening the mail. The clerk who opens that day's mail immediately stamps all checks for deposit only. Each day, just before lunch, one of the clerks prepares a list of all cash and checks to be deposited in Parktown's bank account. The office is closed from 12 noon until 2 p.m. for lunch. During that time, the office manager takes the daily deposit to the bank. During the lunch break, the clerk who opened the mail that day uses the list of cash receipts and checks to update patient accounts. The clerks take turns preparing and mailing monthly statements to patients with unpaid balances. One of the clerks writes off uncollectible accounts only after the physician who performed their respective services believes the account will not pay and communicates that belief to the office manager. The office manager then issues a credit memo to write off the account, which the clerk processes. The office manager supervises the clerks, issues write-off memos, schedules appointments for the doctors, makes bank deposits, reconciles bank statements, and performs general correspondence tasks. Additional services are performed monthly by a local accountant who posts summaries prepared by the clerks to the general ledger, prepares income statements, and files the appropriate payroll forms and tax returns. Next, I will hand it over to my colleagues, Melissa and Chun, who will talk about the revenue cycle regarding the cash and check collections.
We've made this into several parts in order to make it easier for our clients to see. So we split this up into physician, managers, accountants, and clerks. So although we have several people of the same role, the responsibilities in this Visio diagram is not, it's not necessarily that one person does everything, but although everyone in the same role splits up these responsibilities.
So first the patient comes in, and then if they ask for credit, the physician then has to approve the credit. And if the physician approves the credit, it goes onto the physician memo. And from there, the physician memo then goes over to the clerk, which the clerk takes the memo and uses it to update the receivable, which goes into the accounts receivable database.
So when the patient, after the patient gets their credit approved, the physician has to perform their services, and after their services have been rendered, he prepares a charge slip. A charge slip is then sent over to the clerk, and the clerk from that takes that document and prepares a bill. The bill is, first thing, the bill is sent to the patient, and a copy of the bill is then used to prepare a revenue summary. That revenue summary is then cross-referenced with the memo in order to update the accounts receivable and the accounts receivable the database.
My colleague Melissa just mentioned about the payment using credit. Now I want to mention about the payment using cash or check. If the patient decided to submit the payment using the cash, then the clerk will manually prepare the record and give the patient the pre-number receipt documents. And if the patient decided to pay using the check as the payment, the clerk will manually process the checks by stamp as the deposit only. and then the stamp checks document will be passed to the office manager to take it to deposit it to the bank. The clerks will also prepare the list of checks and cash manually, and the list of cash and checks document will be passed to the local accountant. Also, the clerks will also update the patient account using the computer process. And finally, the clerk will save it in the patient account database, and then that will be the end of the flow chart.
So the clerk stamps the checks, and then that goes to the manager. The clerk also prepares the list of cash and checks, and then that goes to the accountant. So for the manager, after obtaining the stamped checks and cash from the clerk, they then go to the bank to manually deposit it. For the accountant, after obtaining the list of cash and checks from the clerk, they then update the ledger, which updates the information to the database.
Hi, doctor.
Hi.
Hi. I actually need your help. So can you approve my credit for the payment?
Okay, let me see. Okay, you're approved for credit. What seems to be the problem today?
I have a sore throat, doctor.
Okay, I will prescribe you some antibiotics.
Thank you.
Here's the patient's charge slip. Please prepare her bill.
Of course. Hello.
Hello.
Are you here for your bill?
Yes.
Here you go. I prepared it for you. You can pay up front in the receptionist.
Thank you.
No.
Bye.
I received a memo from the physician. Now I'm just going to update it to the accounts receivable. Hello.
Hello. Oh, I want to pay for my services.
Perfect. Would you like to pay with cash or check?
Cash.
Cash? Okay, I
Yes.
can take it right now. Okay. Alright, here you go. Here's your pre-numbered receipt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here's the list of cash and checks. Now I'm going to update the patient's accounts.
Come in.
Hello, manager.
Hi, clerk.
I have the stamped checks and cash for today. Would you please deposit it at the bank during lunchtime, please?
Okay, I will take this to the bank and deposit it.
Alright.
Hi, I'm here to deposit this cash and checks for the bank.
Okay. You're all set.
Thank you.
Hello, here I have the list of cash and checks. Would you please update the ledger whenever possible?
Okay, thank you. I'll update the ledger now.
Thank you. Internal controls are mechanisms, rules, and procedures implemented by a company to ensure the integrity of financial and accounting information, promote accountability, and prevent fraud. Here are some suggested internal controls we think that will improve Parktown Medical Center's internal control process. So one opportunity is when most patients pay for services rendered by cash or check on the day of their visit. Sometimes, however, the physician who is to perform the respective services approves credit based on the interview. So an improvement would be where the physician is approving the credit sales. We find that the interview can be very subjective. A more objective measuring option would be where the clerk checks the patient's credit scores and the pending credit sales. This is more effective because during an interview, the physician can be biased towards the patient in different ways depending on their answers to specific questions. To eliminate the bias, by checking only the credit scores and pending credit sales, we can determine that the patient is fit or not to pay by credit.
So we made some edits to the Visio diagram incorporating the internal controls that we suggested. So this one is corresponding with the control that we suggested regarding having a clerk double check the patient's credit score rather than having credit approved based on the physician interview. So firstly, the patient comes in and then the physician creates a credit request form. That credit request form is then sent to the clerk, who then approves the credit based on their credit scores. She then stamps and approves the credit form, and that is sent back to the physician. And from here on out, the process remains the same. The physician performs the service, prepares the source slip, and this then goes back to another part of the diagram.
Suggested internal controls we do is where the checks that get mailed get stamped and deposited. It says that the clerk takes turns opening the mail. The clerk that opens that day's mail immediately stamps all checks for deposit only. Each day, just before lunch, one of the clerks prepare a list of all checks in cash to be deposited in Parktown's bank account. The problem with this is that there is only one designated clerk for preparing the list of all cash and checks to be deposited, but the clerk who opens the mail to stamp them is rotated every day. This means that in every 3 days, the same clerk would open the mail as well as prepare the list for the checks. We recommend that the same clerk should not be able to prepare the list and have access in opening the mail for the checks. This is because if both jobs were to fall on the same clerk, they can potentially neglect to stamp some of them and steal the money. What Parktown can do is have a copy of the list of checks go to the accountant, so when the checks get deposited, the accountant can reference the list and the receipt to make sure the numbers match.
So this is another part of the diagram that we changed based on another internal control that we suggested. And this one is based on the idea that the manager, after he deposits the money, before it just ended there. But now that we've updated this, he instead gets a deposit slip after he deposits it from the bank, and that deposit slip is cross-referenced with the list of checks and cash that the clerk makes. The clerk then matches the amounts and then makes a she then marks the list of cash and checks as deposited. From this point on, it remains the same as the previous diagram. The clerk then takes the marked list of checks and cash and then updates the patient account. The patient account is then updated to the database, and that's the end of the diagram.
Another area for improvement is where the manager takes the daily deposit to be deposited in the bank when the office is closed from noon to 2 p.m. for lunchtime. We suggest that the manager should provide the receipt of the deposit once they return from the bank to make sure that they actually deposited all of the money. This is necessary for confirmation and record-keeping purposes. After that, we can have a clerk cross-reference the deposit confirmation with the prior day's list of checks that needs to be deposited, and the list should match. This is to prevent the manager from stealing some of the cash or checks and claiming that they deposited everything.
The fourth suggested internal control has to do with the separation of duty amongst Parktown Medical Center's staff. So the opportunity proposed here is during the lunch break, the clerk who opened the mail that day uses a list of cash receipts and checks to update the patient accounts. This is an issue because the same person should not be both opening the checks and updating the patient's accounts. So we believe that one clerk should be in charge of opening checks and cash mail, which is custody, and another clerk should be updating the patient's accounts, which has to do with recording the information. This is a very simple and effective solution, and it will maintain maximum efficiency. The last suggested internal control is very similar to the previous one in that there needs to be a separation of duty and power. So the opportunity proposed here is the office manager supervises the clerks, issues write-off memos, schedules appointments for the doctors, makes bank deposits, reconciles bank statements, and performs general correspondence duties. This is an issue because the manager both has custody and recording power, and there should be a division of duty here. So the manager should be in charge of handling the deposits, which is custody, and they should also still maintain their other duties such as supervising the clerk, issuing write-off memos, and even scheduling appointments. And then the clerk should be in charge of reconciling bank statements, which is recording. This concludes our proposal for Parktown Medical Center. Thank you for your time and consideration.